Marcus Sterling shoved the 23-year-old intern against the glass wall of his corner office, his Armani suit pressed against her torn blouse, as security cameras captured nothing. He'd disabled them 20 minutes ago. Grace Winters clutched her grandmother's pendant, the only thing her family had left after bankruptcy, while the 50-year-old CEO's breath reeked of whiskey and entitlement at 9:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in downtown Manhattan. What this predator didn't know was that the shy girl from small-town Kansas had activated a hidden microphone sewn into her collar, streaming everything live to 12,000 viewers who were already calling 911. Within 7 minutes, NYPD would storm through those mahogany doors. But first, she had to survive what Business Insider would later call the most shocking corporate takedown in Wall Street history. Grace had arrived at Sterling Industries exactly 14 days earlier, her second-hand pumps clicking nervously across the marble lobby as she reported for her first day as a marketing intern. The building towered 47 floors above Madison Avenue, its gleaming steel and glass facade reflecting the kind of power she'd only seen in movies back in Clearwater, Kansas. Her student loans totaled $87,000. Her mother worked double shifts at a nursing home to help with rent. And this unpaid internship was supposed to be her golden ticket into corporate America. She'd beaten out 300 applicants for this position, graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern, and spent her last $200 on a professional outfit from a consignment shop. The receptionist had looked her up and down with barely concealed disdain, noting her off-brand handbag and drugstore makeup before directing her to the 32nd floor, where the marketing department sprawled across an open-plan office designed to intimidate as much as inspire. You must be the charity case from Kansas. Tyler Nash had announced loudly enough for half the floor to hear, his Yale-class ring catching the fluorescent lights as he gestured dismissively. As Marcus Sterling's executive assistant and unofficial enforcer, the 34-year-old trust fund baby had perfected the art of psychological warfare disguised as corporate hazing. Let me guess, full scholarship. Sob story essay about growing up poor. Thinks she's going to change the world one PowerPoint at a time? The nearby employees had shifted uncomfortably, some hiding smirks behind coffee cups, while others suddenly found their screens fascinating. Grace had felt heat rise to her cheeks but forced herself to extend her hand professionally, remembering her mother's advice about killing them with kindness. Tyler had ignored the gesture, instead dropping a stack of binders that scattered across the floor with a crash. Oops, better get used to picking things up. Farm girl, that's about all you're qualified for here. The first week had been a masterclass in systematic humiliation that would have broken someone without Grace's hidden reservoir of strength. Tyler assigned her impossible tasks with unrealistic deadlines, then publicly berated her for any minor imperfection. He accidentally deleted her files, forcing her to recreate 8 hours of work. He scheduled mandatory meetings during her lunch break, then reported her for eating at her desk. He forwarded her personal emails to the entire department, highlighting passages about her financial struggles with mocking commentary. When she'd tried to report the behavior to HR, Diana Chen had listened with practiced sympathy before explaining that Tyler was a valuable team member going through a difficult divorce, and perhaps Grace should focus on fitting into the corporate culture rather than making waves during her probationary period. But it was Marcus Sterling himself who transformed workplace bullying into something far more sinister. The CEO had built his empire on a foundation of intimidation, sexual harassment settlements sealed with NDAs, and a board of directors too focused on quarterly profits to question his methods. At 53, with silver hair styled by Manhattan's most expensive barber and a body maintained by a personal trainer, he projected the kind of power that made investors swoon and employees cower. His wife lived in their Hamptons estate, self-medicating with Xanax and charity galas. While he treated the office as his personal hunting ground, Grace had caught his attention during her second week when she'd corrected a data error in a presentation, saving the company from a potentially catastrophic marketing campaign. Instead of gratitude, She'd seen something predatory flash in his gray eyes. The kind of look that made her unconsciously check that all her buttons were fastened. "Grace Winters," he'd said, rolling her name around his mouth like expensive wine during their first one-on-one meeting. "Tyler tells me you're struggling to adapt to our corporate standards. Farm girls usually do." He'd circled her chair while she sat frozen. Professional development, supposedly the topic, but his intentions radiating from every gesture. "You know, I grew up poor too. Trailer park in Detroit. But I learned something important. You have to be willing to do whatever it takes to succeed. Are you willing to do whatever it takes?" "Grace?" His hand had landed on her shoulder, fingers pressing just hard enough to convey ownership rather than encouragement. She'd managed to deflect with questions about the quarterly marketing goals, but the message was clear. She was no longer just an intern to be hazed, but prey to be hunted. The escalation followed a predictable pattern that workplace predators had perfected long before number Me Too made headlines. Marcus scheduled unnecessary late-night meetings when the office emptied. He stood too close in elevators, his cologne overwhelming in the confined space. He made comments about her appearance disguised as professional feedback. "That skirt's too long for client meetings, you need to show more confidence." Or, "Your hair looks better. Down ponytails are too severe for our brand image." When she maintained professional boundaries, the retaliation was swift. Her keycard mysteriously stopped working, stranding her outside the building in the rain. Her desk was relocated 3 times in 1 week, each spot worse than the last. Her name was removed from project credits, her ideas presented by Tyler as his own innovations. The breaking point arrived on a rain-soaked Tuesday morning when Grace discovered her workspace had been moved again, this time to a supply closet that barely fit a desk. Her personal items were scattered across the floor, including a framed photo of her late grandmother that now bore a suspicious boot print across the cracked glass. As she knelt to gather her belongings, fighting tears of frustration, she heard Tyler's mocking laughter echoing from the main floor. "Looks like Dorothy finally found her place," he announced to his audience of sycophants. "Maybe if she clicks her heels 3 times, she can go back to Kansas where she belongs." But as Grace picked up her grandmother's photo, something shifted inside her. The woman in that picture had survived the Great Depression, raised 6 children alone after her husband died in a factory accident, and lived to 93 without ever backing down from a fight. Grace traced the crack across her grandmother's determined smile and made a decision that would change everything. That night, Grace had worked until 3 a.m. not on marketing reports, but on something far more dangerous. She researched New York's single-party consent laws for recording conversations. She studied similar cases of workplace harassment, noting which strategies succeeded and which failed. She discovered that Sterling Industries had paid out 12 separate settlements in the past 5 years, all sealed with ironclad NDAs that silenced victims while enabling continued predation. She found archived social media posts from former female employees whose careers mysteriously ended after reporting harassment. Most importantly, she learned about a class action lawsuit brewing in California against one of Sterling's subsidiaries, led by a lawyer named Patricia Hawkins who'd made her reputation taking down corporate predators. By dawn, Grace had sewn a tiny microphone into the collar of her blouse, connected to an app that could stream live to multiple platforms simultaneously. The next phase required careful orchestration and nerves of steel that her Kansas upbringing had forged through tornadoes and farm equipment accidents. Grace began documenting everything with obsessive precision. She forwarded emails to a private server, screenshot text messages, and created detailed logs of every incident with dates, times, and witnesses. She reached out anonymously to former employees, slowly building a network of women who'd suffered similar treatment but felt powerless to act alone. She practiced keeping her expression neutral, while Tyler subjected her to increasingly creative humiliations, knowing that soon she'd need to maintain that composure under far worse circumstances. Most crucially, she studied Marcus Sterling's patterns, learning that he was most aggressive on Tuesday mornings after his weekly breakfast with board members, when cocaine and adrenaline mixed with his usual cocktail of narcissism and misogyny. The trap required bait that Marcus couldn't resist, and Grace crafted it with surgical precision. She submitted a marketing proposal that subtly highlighted inefficiencies in Tyler's management. Knowing he'd run straight to his master with tales of insubordination, she wore her grandmother's pendant visibly, having overheard Marcus's contempt for sentimental weaknesses that he loved to exploit. She timed her arrival for 9:15 a.m. after most employees would be in meetings, but before the executive floor got busy with client lunches. She even practiced her scared expression in the mirror. Though the trembling would be genuine when the moment arrived, everything depended on Marcus taking the bait, and predators like him rarely disappointed when presented with what they perceived as helpless prey. My office. Now. The text from Marcus arrived at 9:23 a.m. Exactly as Grace had predicted, she activated the streaming app, watching the viewer count climb as her underground network spread the word through encrypted channels. Her hands shook as she saved her work, backed up her files one final time, and walked toward the executive elevator with the same resolve her grandmother had shown, walking into a male-dominated factory floor in 1943. The 32nd floor hummed with typical Tuesday morning energy conference calls. Keyboard clicks, the espresso machine's familiar hiss while Grace moved through it like a ghost approaching her own execution. Several colleagues glanced up with sympathy but quickly looked away. Having learned that association with Marcus's targets was career suicide, only Diana Chen watched with unusual intensity from her glass-walled HR office, her expression unreadable. As Grace passed, the executive floor exuded the kind of aggressive luxury that corporate America mistakes for success. Italian marble, abstract art worth more than most people's homes, and a receptionist whose salary probably exceeded Grace's student loans, just for maintaining Marcus's calendar and ego. He's expecting you, the woman said without looking up from her screen, her manicured nails clicking dismissively toward the corner office. Grace noticed the security cameras in the hallway, their red lights conspicuously dark, and felt her pulse accelerate. She touched her collar, ensuring the microphone was positioned correctly, then knocked on the mahogany door that separated Marcus Sterling from both his employees and any semblance of accountability. Enter. His voice carried the casual authority of someone who'd never been told no in any meaningful way. Grace found him standing behind his desk, silhouetted against floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a king's view of Manhattan. The office screamed compensation in every detail, the putting green in one corner, the wall of photographs showing Marcus with politicians and celebrities, the leather furniture that cost more than her mother's annual salary. He'd removed his suit jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and loosened his tie in what she recognized as a calculated display of casual dominance. The door clicked shut behind her with an ominous finality, and Grace noticed he'd already drawn the privacy blinds that usually stayed open during business hours. Tyler tells me you've been spreading lies about his performance, Marcus began, not bothering with pretense. Says you're trying to undermine his authority, create division in the team. That's not very grateful, considering we took a chance on someone with your limited background. He moved around the desk with predatory grace, positioning himself between her and the door. Do you know how many Ivy League graduates would kill for your position? How many qualified candidates we passed over to give you this opportunity? The questions were rhetorical, delivered with the kind of smile that belonged on a shark. Grace remained silent, knowing anything she said would be twisted into further justification for what he planned next. Nothing to say? That's a first? Marcus stepped closer, close enough that she could see the dilated pupils that suggested his morning bump of cocaine. Smell the whiskey masked by mint. Maybe that's your problem. Grace, you don't know when to speak up and when to shut up. Let me help you understand the difference. His hand shot out, grabbing her grandmother's pendant with enough force to snap the delicate chain. Sentimental garbage like this has no place in a professional environment. Just like people who don't understand their place in the corporate hierarchy, he dangled the pendant between them, his smirk widening as tears finally appeared in Grace's eyes, genuine tears for the last gift her grandmother had given her. but also perfect for the performance being streamed to an exponentially growing audience. "Please," Grace whispered, reaching for the pendant only to have Marcus jerk it away. "That's all I have left of her. She died last year. And spare me the sob story." He pocketed the pendant with casual cruelty. "You want it back? You want to keep this internship? Then you're going to learn how things really work at Sterling Industries." His free hand grabbed her wrist when she tried to step back. His grip tight enough to leave marks. "You think that little recording device in your collar is going to protect you? I noticed it the second you walked in. Probably some pathetic attempt at a lawsuit, right? Good luck with that. I own judges who eat girls like you for breakfast." Grace felt her heart stop, but her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. When they think they've won, that's when they're most vulnerable. She let her shoulders slump in defeat, allowing Marcus to believe his intimidation had worked. You knew?" "Of course I knew. I've been doing this since before you were born." "Farm girl." His arrogance peaked, drunk on his own perceived power. "But here's what you didn't know. I had the security cameras disabled 20 minutes ago. Your little recording? It's just your word against mine. And we both know how that story ends. Now, you're going to delete whatever you think you've recorded. You're going to sign an NDA. And then you're going to learn exactly what kind of special projects I have in mind for pretty little interns who don't know their place." "Actually," Grace said, her voice suddenly steady, "I do know how this story ends." She pulled out her phone with her free hand, showing him the streaming app's interface, 14,000 viewers and climbing. Plus, it's being simultaneously recorded to 3 cloud servers and Patricia Hawkins' legal team in California. "Oh, and that NDA you mentioned? Your wife's divorce attorney is watching too. Turns out she's very interested in your extracurricular activities." Marcus's face drained of color as he processed the implications. His grip loosened just enough for Grace to pull free, stepping back toward the windows. "You stupid little," he lunged forward, rage replacing calculation, and shoved her hard against the glass wall. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs, her blouse tearing at the shoulder as his hands pressed against her throat. "You think you can destroy me? Me? I'll bury you so deep they'll need archaeologists to find your career." But Grace had planned for this too. Knowing that cornered predators always revealed their true nature when challenged, she gasped into the microphone, ensuring every threat was captured clearly. "Marcus Sterling, assaulting me. Help." The viewer count spiked past 20,000 as the live stream spread across social media platforms like wildfire. Comments flooded in faster than the app could display them, many including timestamps and promises to testify. More importantly, she could already hear the first sirens approaching, the beautiful sound of consequences finally arriving for a man who'd believed himself untouchable. "You're finished," Marcus snarled, but his voice cracked with the first hint of fear. "I'll sue you for defamation, for corporate espionage, for for telling the truth." Grace managed to speak despite his grip. "Every woman you've assaulted, every career you've destroyed, every life you've shattered, they're all watching. And in about 3 minutes, so will the FBI's white-collar crime division." Turns out that class action lawsuit in California includes some interesting allegations about embezzlement and bribery. Patricia Hawkins says, "Thanks for the additional evidence." By the way, the sirens grew louder, and Marcus finally seemed to grasp the totality of his situation. He released Grace, stumbling backward as if she'd become radioactive. His hands shook as he reached for his phone, probably to call his lawyer, but froze when he saw his own face reflected in the black screen, not the polished CEO image he'd cultivated, but the reality of a predator caught in his own trap. Through the windows, they could both see NYPD vehicles surrounding the building's entrance, officers already streaming through the lobby doors. "This isn't over," he said, but the threat sounded hollow now, like a child's tantrum against bedtime. "You have no idea who you're messing with. I have connections. Resources." "Had," Grace corrected, touching her torn blouse, where the microphone continued broadcasting, past tense. Check your phone. Marcus. The board of directors just called an emergency meeting. Something about a morality clause and protecting shareholder value. Tyler's probably packing his desk right now, assuming he's not already in handcuffs. And Diana Chen? She just sent me an interesting email about becoming a whistleblower herself. Turns out she's been documenting your activities for years, waiting for someone brave enough to go public first. The office door burst open with enough force to crack the mahogany against the wall. 6 NYPD officers entered with weapons drawn, followed by 2 FBI agents whose stern expressions suggested this wasn't their first corporate takedown. Marcus Sterling, the lead officer announced, her voice cutting through the chaos. You're under arrest for assault, false imprisonment, and attempted sexual assault. You have the right to remain silent. This is a mistake, Marcus shouted, his carefully styled hair now wild, sweat staining his expensive shirt. She set me up. She's trying to extort me. I want my lawyer. But Grace had one final card to play. The ace she'd saved for this exact moment. Officers, Mr. Sterling just confessed to disabling the security cameras to assault me. He also has my grandmother's pendant in his right jacket pocket. Stole it before attacking me. And if you check his desk drawer, second one down, you'll find cocaine residue. He was high when he assaulted me. The lead FBI agent raised an eyebrow. How do you... 47,000 viewers saw him put the pendant in his pocket. Grace explained, holding up her phone where the stream continued. As for the cocaine, let's just say I'm not the first intern he's attacked while under the influence. The others are ready to testify. What followed was a careful choreography of justice that Grace had only seen in her dreams. The officers cuffed Marcus Sterling, the silver-haired king of Madison Avenue, reduced to a perp walk in front of his own employees. They bagged the pendant as evidence. The one officer quietly promised Grace it would be returned after processing. They found the cocaine exactly where she'd predicted, along with 17 other pieces of evidence that painted a picture of systematic criminal behavior spanning decades. As they led him toward the elevator, Marcus made the mistake of looking back at Grace one final time. You destroyed everything, he said, as if she should feel guilty for refusing to be his victim. Grace stood straighter, her torn blouse and bruised throat badges of honor rather than shame. No, Marcus, I revealed everything. You destroyed it all by yourself. One assault at a time. The elevator doors closed on his snarling face, and Grace finally allowed herself to breathe. Her phone showed 59,000 viewers, many of them sharing their own stories of workplace harassment in the comments. Patricia Hawkins had already sent 3 messages about representation. Major news outlets were calling for statements, but in that moment, standing in the office where Marcus Sterling had thought to break her, Grace felt only the quiet satisfaction of a promise kept. She pulled up a chair and began typing an email to the all-staff distribution list. The subject line read, "The truth about Sterling Industries." As she typed, employees began gathering outside the glass walls, their expressions mixing shock, admiration, and hope. Diana Chen was among them, holding a banker's box full of files and wearing the grim smile of someone whose patience had finally paid off. "Dear colleagues," Grace wrote, her fingers steady despite everything. "My name is Grace Winters, and for the past 2 weeks, I've been your intern. What you just witnessed was not an isolated incident, but the culmination of systematic harassment that many of us have endured in silence. That silence ends today." The email would go viral within hours, shared across LinkedIn and Twitter until Sterling Industries became synonymous with corporate accountability, but that was still to come. For now, Grace focused on choosing each word carefully, knowing that she was writing not just for herself, but for every woman who'd been cornered in an office, every employee who'd been bullied into submission, every person who'd been told their only choice was compliance or unemployment. Outside, the rain had stopped. Sunlight streamed through the windows where Marcus had tried to break her, illuminating the Manhattan skyline that no longer seemed quite so intimidating. Grace touched her collar where the microphone still nestled, to then look directly at her phone camera, where thousands of viewers waited for her next words. "Thank you for witnessing this," she said simply. "Thank you for not looking away. And, to anyone facing their own Marcus Sterling, you're not alone. You never were." As she spoke, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The contact name made her smile for the first time in 2 weeks. Uncle Robert, Department of Justice. She'd been saving that revelation for part 2. When Marcus Sterling would learn that the farm girl from Kansas had connections of her own connections that had been watching Sterling Industries long before Grace ever submitted her internship application, the FBI raid wasn't just about one assault in one office, but about a federal investigation that Grace had volunteered to help from the inside. But that was a story for another moment. For now, she had an email to finish, a grandmother's pendant to recover, and a live stream audience of 73,000 people learning that sometimes the quietest voices carry the furthest. When they finally decide to speak, the viewer count continued climbing as Grace typed, each number representing someone who would remember this Tuesday morning when a shy intern from Kansas reminded corporate America that power built on fear was just a glass house waiting for the right stone. Tyler Nash tried to slip out during the chaos, his Yale confidence evaporating as employees blocked his path. Someone had already taped a printout to his desk, a screenshot of him admitting to deleting Grace's files, forwarding her emails, orchestrating her humiliation. His phone rang, incessantly recruiters rescinding offers, his attorney warning about civil liability. His ex-wife's lawyer expressing renewed interest in hidden assets. The golden boy of Sterling Industries had discovered that when kingdoms fall, the princes rarely escape the revolution. Meanwhile, Grace continued typing, her words measured but devastating. She detailed every incident, named every enabler, and provided timestamps that corresponded to security footage Marcus hadn't known was being backed up to a secondary server by an IT employee who'd grown tired of covering up executive misconduct. The marketing intern from Kansas had done her homework, and the thoroughness of her documentation would become a Harvard Business School case study in whistleblower preparation. But she couldn't have imagined how far the ripples would spread, or how many other Marcus Sterlings would fall when their victims found courage in her example. As the clock approached 11 a.m., Grace heard footsteps in the hallway, not the confident stride of executives, but the hesitant approach of employees who'd worked in fear for too long. They gathered outside Marcus's office like pilgrims at a shrine, some crying, others applauding, many simply staring at the space where their tormentor had finally faced consequences. Grace stood to face them, her torn blouse and visible bruises, testament to the price of speaking truth to power. "It's over," someone whispered, and the words rippled through the crowd like a benediction. But Grace knew better. This was not an ending but a beginning, the first chapter in a story that would reshape Sterling Industries and send shockwaves through corporate America. The live stream had captured a moment, but the movement it would inspire was just taking its first breath. As she looked at the faces around her, Grace saw not just colleagues but allies in a fight that extended far beyond one predator in one office. Her phone buzzed again. Patricia Hawkins, 47 missed calls. Grace smiled, knowing that California's fiercest corporate justice attorney was about to become very busy. But first, she had an email to send, a story to tell, and a promise to keep to every woman who'd been silenced by men like Marcus Sterling. The storm was just beginning, and Grace Wintersthie, shy intern from Kansas, stood ready at its center. No longer prey, but predator hunter, armed with truth and backed by an army of survivors who'd finally found their voice. The revelation that Grace Winters was more than just a Kansas farm girl sent shockwaves through Sterling Industries that reverberated far beyond the 47 floors of Madison Avenue. As employees huddled around their screens watching news helicopters circle the building, Grace finally answered her uncle's call, activating speaker mode so the remaining executives could hear every word. "Grace, are you injured?" Robert Winter's voice carried the professional concern of a deputy attorney general mixed with the barely controlled rage of an uncle who just watched his niece be assaulted on livestream. "We have agents throughout the building. Operation Sterling Trap is fully active." "Sterling Trap?" someone gasped from the gathered crowd. And Grace allowed herself the smallest smile of satisfaction. For 3 months before her internship application, she'd worked with federal investigators to build an airtight case against Sterling Industries' executive team. Every humiliation, every degrading task, every moment of harassment had been carefully documented, not just for personal justice, but for a RICO investigation that would expose decades of criminal enterprise masquerading as corporate culture. The shy intern persona had been real. Grace genuinely was introverted and kind, but her presence at Sterling Industries was anything but accidental. "I'm okay, Uncle Robert," Grace replied, touching her bruised throat. Marcus took the bait exactly as predicted. "We have his confession about disabling security cameras, the assault on livestream, and he admitted to the systematic harassment. Plus, Diana Chen just handed me 12 boxes of documentation she's been collecting for 6 years. She glanced at the HR director, who stood straighter despite tears streaming down her face. "Turns out she's been waiting for someone with federal backup to finally expose this place." The speakerphone crackled with Robert's controlled fury. "The Southern District of New York has teams raiding Marcus's properties as we speak. His Hamptons estate, the Manhattan penthouse, even his yacht. We're also executing warrants at Tyler Nash's apartment and safety deposit boxes." "Grace, I need you to know that what you did volunteering to go undercover without formal training, putting yourself at risk." His voice broke slightly. "Your grandmother would be proud, but I'm pulling you out now." "Not yet," Grace said firmly, surprising everyone, including herself. "There are 17 women on this floor alone who've been assaulted or harassed by Sterling executives. They deserve to tell their stories while the cameras are rolling and the feds are listening. We do this right, or we don't do it at all." She looked at the faces around her marketing associates who'd been groped in elevators, accountants who'd traded their dignity for paychecks, janitors who'd cleaned up after executive parties that left women traumatized and silenced. "2 more hours. Uncle Robert, let me finish what we started." What followed was a masterclass in systematic justice that business schools would later teach as the Sterling Protocol. Grace transformed Marcus's corner office into an impromptu testimony center, with FBI agents taking formal statements while news cameras captured the historic moment. Women who'd signed NDAs discovered those agreements were void when covering criminal activity. Men who'd witnessed harassment but stayed silent for their careers came forward with corroborating evidence. Even Marcus's personal secretary, a 60-year-old woman who'd endured his abuse for 15 years, finally felt safe enough to reveal a hidden hard drive containing recordings of hundreds of incriminating conversations. Tyler Nash's arrest happened live on CNN as he tried to flee through the parking garage, his Porsche blocked by federal vehicles, while helicopters captured his pathetic attempt to ram through a police barricade. The Yale Golden Boy, who'd tormented Grace for 2 weeks, was reduced to sobbing on asphalt, begging officers to call his father a federal judge, who would later recuse himself from the case in disgrace. The charges against Tyler included conspiracy, wire fraud, and destruction of evidence. But it was the testimony of 37 employees he'd bullied that would ensure his conviction. His mugshot tear-stained face, rumpled designer suit, the epitome of privileged entitlement finally facing consequences, became a meme symbolizing the fall of toxic corporate culture. By noon, Sterling Industries' stock price had plummeted 63%, triggering automatic trading halts, while the board of directors held emergency sessions from their own lawyers' offices. The company's largest investors, including 3 major pension funds, demanded immediate restructuring and the resignation of every executive who'd enabled Marcus's reign of terror. Patricia Hawkins arrived from California with a team of 20 attorneys, transforming a conference room into a war room for what would become the largest workplace harassment class action suit in American history. The initial complaint would name 43 defendants and seek $800 million in damages. But those numbers would triple as more victims found courage to come forward. This is bigger than Sterling Industries. Patricia announced at an impromptu press conference in the building's lobby, with Grace standing beside her, still wearing the torn blouse that had become a symbol of resistance. We're uncovering a network of executives across multiple companies who've protected each other, shared strategies for silencing victims, and treated workplace harassment as a business expense. Grace Winters didn't just expose one predator. She pulled a thread that's unraveling an entire system. The thread pulled harder when investigators discovered Marcus's private files, encrypted folders he'd foolishly labeled insurance. Inside were photographs, videos, and documentation of similar behavior by executives at 17 other major corporations' leverage he'd collected over the years to ensure mutual protection. Within hours, FBI raids expanded across Manhattan's financial district like dominoes falling. CEOs who'd shared drinks and victims with Marcus Sterling suddenly found themselves in handcuffs, their own employees emboldened by Grace's example to speak truths that had been suppressed for decades. Grace stood in what had been Marcus's office, now transformed into a command center for justice. When her phone rang with a familiar Kansas area code, her mother's voice trembled with a mixture of fear and pride. "Baby, I just saw the news. Are you hurt? They showed, oh God. They showed him attacking you." Grace could hear the television in the background, her own face appearing on every major network as the woman who'd brought down a corporate empire with a hidden microphone and unshakable courage. "I'm okay, Mom," Grace assured her, though exhaustion was beginning to crack through her adrenaline. "Remember when Grandma used to say that bullies only have the power we give them?" She was right. Marcus Sterling thought he owned everyone in this building. But he was just a scared little man hiding behind expensive suits and intimidation. The second someone stood up to him with actual consequences, he crumbled. "Your grandmother," her mother whispered, and Grace could hear tears in her voice. "She'd be so proud. When you were little, she used to say, you had her spine quiet but unbreakable." She was right about that too. They talked for a few more minutes, Grace assuring her mother that she was safe, that federal protection was in place, that the nightmare was ending rather than beginning. But as she hung up, Grace realized the true magnitude of what she'd set in motion. The live stream, still running, showed 1.3 million viewers from around the world, all witnessing the fall of American corporate royalty. Diana Chen approached with a cup of tea and a gentle smile that seemed foreign on a face that had maintained professional coldness for so long. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "When you came to me about Tyler's harassment, I gave you the company line about fitting in. The truth is, I'd given that same speech to 43 women over 6 years. Each time, a piece of my soul died." She handed Grace a flash drive. "Everything's on here. Every complaint I was ordered to bury. Every settlement I was forced to negotiate. Every woman I failed to protect. I documented it all, waiting for someone brave enough to use it." "You protected yourself while gathering evidence," Grace replied, accepting both the tea and the vindication. "That's not cowardice, it's strategy. We all do what we need to survive until we can fight back effectively." She thought about the 2 weeks of humiliation she'd endured, knowing that federal agents were monitoring everything, that each incident was building a stronger case. Sometimes the best revenge isn't immediate, it's inevitable. The afternoon brought a parade of revelations that would fuel documentaries and podcasts for years to come. Marcus's wife arrived with her divorce attorney and a forensic accountant, ready to claim her share of assets before they were frozen by federal authorities. She'd known about his workplace activities for years, but had been bought off with jewelry and European vacations, complicit in her comfort, until Grace's live stream had made denial impossible. Now she wanted to rebrand herself as another victim, though the Sterling Industries survivors gave her a wide berth, recognizing the difference between victimhood and enabling. Meanwhile, employees throughout the building began sharing their own stories on social media. creating a hashtag number Sterling Truth that trended globally within hours. A janitor revealed finding hidden cameras in the women's bathrooms. An IT specialist admitted to being ordered to delete security footage on 47 separate occasions. A former intern posted hospital records from a sexual assault that had been covered up with a $200,000 payment and a threat against her family. Each revelation added another charge to the growing federal case, another brick in the wall of justice being built around Marcus Sterling and his enablers. At 3 p.m., Grace finally agreed to leave the building under FBI escort, her mission complete, but her body exhausted from sustained adrenaline and emotional trauma. As she walked through the lobby, something extraordinary happened. Employees lined the path, not just women, but men too. Many crying, all applauding. The security guard who'd ignored her distress calls saluted with tears in his eyes. The receptionist who'd sneered at her secondhand clothes stood with a sign reading, "Thank you for your courage." Even maintenance workers emerged from basement offices to witness the moment when David finally defeated Goliath. Outside, the media circus had reached fever pitch. Reporters from 60 countries thrust microphones forward, all wanting exclusive interviews with the intern who'd toppled a corporate dynasty. But Grace walked past them all, focused on the black federal SUV, where her uncle waited. Only when she saw Robert Winters, the deputy attorney general who'd supported her dangerous plan despite every paternal instinct screaming against it, did Grace finally allow herself to collapse into familial arms and release 2 weeks of suppressed terror in shuddering sobs. "You did it, kiddo," Robert whispered, his own voice thick with emotion. "You actually did it. We have enough evidence to prosecute 93 individuals across 12 companies. The Attorney General is calling this the largest corporate crime bust in DOJ history." He pulled back to look at her bruised throat, his professional composure cracking. "When I saw him put his hands on you, Christ, Grace, I almost called in a tactical team right then. The plan required him to escalate," Grace reminded him, though her voice shook. "We needed him to show his true nature on camera, to destroy any possibility of claiming this was consensual or exaggerated. Every woman he's hurt deserved to see him exposed completely, not just caught in some technical violation." She touched her collar where the microphone still rested. "Besides, I knew you were watching. I knew I wasn't really alone." The ride to the federal building passed in a blur of phone calls and debriefs. Grace learned that Marcus's arrest had triggered a cascade effect she couldn't have imagined. His son, a sophomore at Princeton, had called the FBI with information about his father's offshore accounts. His brother, a senator from Connecticut, had preemptively announced he would cooperate fully with investigators about campaign finance violations. Even Marcus's country club had voted unanimously to revoke his membership, more concerned about their reputation than decades of friendship. But it was the message from Clearwater, Kansas, that touched Grace most deeply. Her high school principal had sent a photo of the entire student body gathered in the gymnasium, watching her live stream on the projection screen typically reserved for basketball games. "You've given our girls permission to be brave," the message read. 3 students came forward today about harassment they'd been too scared to report. "You didn't just change a company, Grace, you changed a generation's understanding of what's possible when we refuse to be silent." The formal FBI debriefing took 4 hours, with Grace recounting every detail from her initial application to Sterling Industries through the final confrontation. Prosecutors took particular interest in the network of protectors Marcus had cultivated: judges who dismissed cases, police commissioners who delayed investigations, prosecutors who suddenly found insufficient evidence when Sterling money was involved. The corruption reached deeper than anyone had suspected. But Grace's courage had provided the key to unlocking it all. "We want you to consider witness protection," the lead prosecutor said as evening settled over Manhattan. "Marcus Sterling has resources we're still uncovering. There will be retaliation attempts." Grace thought about her grandmother's farm in Kansas, the life she'd built in Chicago, the normalcy she'd never quite achieved but always craved. Then she thought about the million-plus viewers who'd watched her stand up to a predator, the women who'd found their voices because she'd raised hers, the future interns, who might never face what she'd endured because one person refused to accept that power meant immunity. "No," she said firmly, "I'm done hiding. If they want to come after me, let them try. The whole world is watching now." 2 months later, Grace Winters sat in a congressional hearing room, sworn in as the key witness in Senate investigations into workplace harassment and corporate corruption. Marcus Sterling, in orange jumpsuit and shackles, watched from the defendant's table as his empire was dissected for public consumption. 23 executives had been indicted. $430 million in settlements had been paid to victims. And Sterling Industries had been restructured under federal oversight, with Patricia Hawkins leading the reform efforts. Tyler Nash had pled guilty to multiple charges in exchange for testimony against his former boss, though his cooperation couldn't save him from a 5-year sentence that would be served in general population despite his father's influence. Diana Chen had been promoted to Chief Compliance Officer, tasked with rebuilding a corporate culture from the ground up. The janitor who'd found the hidden cameras now served on the board of directors, a reminder that integrity mattered more than pedigree. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came when Grace visited Marcus in federal detention the night before his sentencing. He sat across from her in the sterile visiting room, his silver hair now gray at the roots, his designer physique deflated, his predator's confidence replaced by the hollow eyes of a man who'd lost everything. "Why?" he asked. The question seeming to encompass his entire fallen existence. Grace touched her grandmother's pendant, returned by the FBI and repaired at their expense, hanging once again around her neck. "Because you thought power meant taking whatever you wanted. Because you believed fear was the same as respect. Because you assumed a farm girl from Kansas would be an easy target." She stood to leave, pausing at the door. "But mostly because every woman you ever hurt deserved to see you fall. And unlike you, Marcus, I keep my promises." The next morning, Marcus Sterling was sentenced to 37 years in federal prison. The judgment broadcast live to an audience of millions. Grace watched from her new office at the nonprofit she'd founded with her settlement money, the Winters Foundation for Workplace Justice. The walls were decorated not with vanity photographs but with letters from survivors who'd found courage in her story. Her desk, simple and functional, bore a single framed photo. Her grandmother standing in front of a Kansas wheat field, chin raised against the wind. Unbreakable. As the judge read Marcus's sentence, Grace's phone buzzed with a message from a young woman in Seattle. "I just reported my boss. Thank you for showing me how." Then another from Dallas. Another from Miami. Another from Portland. The messages kept coming. Each one a reminder that courage, once sparked, spread like wildfire through hearts, ready to burn away fear. Grace Winters, the shy intern from Kansas, had done more than survive a predator. She'd ignited a revolution that would echo through corporate hallways for generations, proving that sometimes the smallest voice, when raised at the right moment, could topple the mightiest titans. Her grandmother had been right. The meek might inherit the earth, but only when they stopped being meek and started being mighty.